Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The silence inside Windsor did not break with shouting. It broke with a seal. William stood before a locked file bearing the late Queen's private mark, and when the final decree was opened, the room changed forever. Camilla's name was there. Diana's name was there. And between them sat one sentence so devastating that even Charles could not pretend the monarchy had prepared for it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not rush the moment. He held the page with the careful stillness of a man who understood that one sentence could cut deeper than any public scandal. The final decree, a last written royal command meant to be obeyed after the monarch's death, had been sealed under the Queen's private authority. It stated, in plain and merciless language, that Camilla was denied access to Diana's private vault, and that future authority over that vault would rest under William's protection. The prince looked down again, as if the words might soften if he read them twice. They did not. Charles felt the blow before anyone spoke. The king sat nearby, his face tightened by a pain he could not dress up as protocol. This was not merely about a locked room or a forgotten collection. Diana's vault was understood inside the family as a protected space, holding private items, letters, personal jewels, and memories tied to the woman whose shadow had never truly left the monarchy. For Charles, the decree reopened the oldest wound in his household. For William, it placed that wound directly into his hands. Camilla heard the decision with a stillness that did not look peaceful. The queen consort had expected resistance, perhaps delay, perhaps another quiet palace compromise. But this was different. Her request had not been rejected by an aide, a committee, or a cautious advisor. It had been rejected by the queen herself, in writing, with the full force of final royal instruction behind it. Camilla's expression changed only slightly, but the room felt it. Her hope of access had not been postponed. It had been ended. The outer door closed with a soft, deliberate sound. A senior aide stepped back, making clear that no courtier would carry this conversation into the corridors before the family had absorbed it. William's hand paused over the lower fold of the file. There was more. Beneath the first decree sat a second sealed instruction, marked for future entry authority. The prince looked at Charles, then at Camilla, and understood that the most painful line had not yet been read. Every royal crisis has a document, but this one had faces. William saw his mother in every word. Charles saw the past he had spent decades trying to survive. Camilla saw a boundary drawn by a woman who was no longer alive to explain it. And Catherine, standing just beyond the center of power, understood that this was not only a family decision, it was a wound reopened by royal authority. William kept his eyes on the page, but everyone in the room knew he was seeing far more than ink. Diana's vault was not just a private store of royal belongings. It was a protected collection of personal letters, jewels, records, and objects linked to his mother's life, kept away from public use because they carried grief as much as history. The prince understood why the queen had used a final decree, a written command meant to survive her death. She had not wanted this left to mood, pressure, or palace convenience. Charles shifted first, and that small movement carried more pain than any speech could have done. The king had a duty to uphold the queen's instruction, yet he also had Camilla beside him, wounded by the same command. He wanted to soften the meaning. He wanted to suggest the decree was about procedure, not rejection. But William did not allow the words to be made gentle. The prince said the language was clear, and the room felt the line harden between duty and denial. Camilla looked at William as if waiting for a private mercy. The queen consort knew the damage before anyone outside Windsor heard a single word. A refusal from the late monarch was not a simple no. It was a permanent mark, sealed by authority, witnessed by trusted officials. and protected from casual review. She asked whether the decision could be revisited, whether time or context might change its force. William answered carefully, but without weakness. The decree was final. It had been witnessed, it had been sealed, and no one in that room had the right to rewrite the Queen's last command. Catherine watched him choose restraint, when anger would have been easier. She saw the tension in his jaw, the old hurt behind his calm voice, and the heavy discipline it took for him not to speak from pain. Her presence gave him balance without taking control from him. Charles noticed it too, and that made the moment harder. The monarchy was not only watching a son defend his mother's memory, it was watching a future king learn how to carry grief without letting it burn the room down. Then Catherine's eyes moved back to the file. William had not mentioned the second sealed instruction. He had read the first blow aloud, but another fold remained untouched, another command waiting beneath the silence. Camilla saw the hesitation. Charles saw it too, and as the people in the room struggled with what the decree meant, one older memory began to rise, a hidden incident that had forced the Queen to write it in the first place. The decree did not appear from nowhere. It was born from one unforgettable night at Balmoral, when a private conversation turned into a royal fracture. The Queen had listened quietly then, saying almost nothing as Diana's name crossed the room like a warning. But those who were present later understood the truth. That was the night the monarch stopped trusting silence to protect the dead. William remembered the moment with painful clarity. The Balmoral Memorial Dinner incident, as it later became known inside the household, was a private family dinner where Camilla asked whether several pieces from Diana's vault could be reviewed for possible historic royal display. A royal display meant placing private objects into a curated palace exhibition, so the public could see them as part of monarchy history. But to the prince, those pieces were not exhibition material. They were his mother's life, her letters, her jewels, and the private remains of a woman the world had already taken too much from. Camilla had spoken carefully that night, but careful words did not make the request harmless. The Queen Consort insisted she wanted history handled properly, not emotionally. She argued that Diana's place in the monarchy should be preserved with dignity, not hidden behind locked doors. William heard something else. He heard his mother's memory being moved from private grief into public control. The prince pushed his chair back just enough for the room to feel it, then asked why Diana's personal items were being discussed without his consent. Charles tried to calm the room, but his voice only made the fracture wider. The king wanted peace, yet peace demanded that someone be disappointed, and he could not bring himself to firmly defend either side. He looked toward Camilla, then toward William, and the hesitation said everything. The prince saw it. The Queen saw it. Even Camilla understood that Charles was standing in the middle of a wound he could not close. His silence became its own answer. The Queen watched William's face change, and that was the moment the monarch understood the danger. Diana's memory was not simply ceremonial. It was living pain inside her son. A private secretary, meaning the trusted official who handles a monarch's most sensitive written instructions, was summoned later that evening. The Queen did not raise her voice. She dictated the first language of the decree with cold precision, making the vault restriction personal, permanent, and impossible to soften later. Camilla believed the dinner had ended in discomfort, not consequence. William believed the matter had been buried. Charles hoped time would make the wound less sharp, but the Queen had already acted. Her final wording named William as the future guardian, because she believed he would protect Diana without turning grief into revenge. That single dinner became the hidden root of everything, and now, years later, the prince had to confront the woman whose request had triggered the monarch's final wall. Camilla did not explode in front of the household. She waited until the door closed. Then the Queen Consort turned to William, with a look that carried years of restraint, resentment, and disbelief. The future king did not move. Charles stood between them, like a man trapped between yesterday and tomorrow. In that private room, the decree became more than paper. It became a confrontation. William held his place as if every breath had to be controlled. The private Windsor sitting room had no junior aides, no soft voices from the corridor, and no one to interrupt the damage once it began. A decree, meaning a formal written order carrying royal authority, had already spoken for the Queen, but Camilla wanted to hear it from him. She asked whether he truly intended to enforce the command exactly as written. The prince answered quietly that he had no right to ignore the monarch's final instruction. Camilla's face hardened at the answer. She said Diana's vault belonged to royal history, and that royal property could not be ruled by grief forever. William's restraint almost cracked. The vault, he reminded her, was not a display room, not a trophy cabinet, not a place for the palace to borrow from when it needed emotional power. It held his mother's private life. It held pieces of a woman who had been watched, used, loved, and broken in public. And this time, he would not let her memory be handled as decoration. Charles stepped forward, desperate to cool the room before the words became impossible to take back. The king tried to say the decree needed careful interpretation, but Camilla turned on him before he could finish. She asked whether he had known her name was written into the restriction. Charles did not answer quickly enough. That pause wounded her more than any direct confession. She looked at him as if the silence had confirmed what she feared. The Queen had not written a general rule. She had written a boundary around Camilla herself. Catherine moved closer to William without speaking. She did not need to defend him. Her presence did enough. The princess understood that he was standing in the middle of a family storm, trying to protect Diana without humiliating Camilla, trying to obey the Queen without breaking Charles. And William felt that support beside him. It steadied him when anger would have been easier. It reminded him that power without control could destroy the very memory he was trying to guard. Camilla's shock turned sharp when William explained the full force of the order. The decree did not only deny her personal entry, it blocked palace staff from granting access on her behalf, meaning no aide, archivist, or official could quietly open the vault under another name. Camilla stared at him, stunned by how tightly the Queen had closed every possible door. Then the prince said one final word that changed the temperature of the room: review. Any attempt to override the decree would trigger a formal review of earlier access requests. And once he said it, the confrontation shifted from hurt feelings to royal power, because someone inside the palace had already tried to move around the Queen's command. Power inside the monarchy rarely looks loud. Sometimes it looks like a key held by the wrong person. Sometimes it looks like a signature placed in the wrong ledger. As William followed the decree's chain of authority, the room discovered why the Queen had been so precise. She had not written the order out of suspicion alone. She had written it because she feared the vault could be opened by pressure disguised as protocol. William asked for the access record, and the room tightened before it arrived. The decree had given him direct guardianship over Diana's vault, meaning he alone held final authority over who could enter, review, move, or approve anything connected to that protected collection. Catherine had been named as a supporting witness for any future ceremonial review, which meant she would stand beside him if the palace ever tried to use Diana's items for public royal purposes. That detail mattered. It meant the Queen had not trusted one signature. She had built a wall with witnesses. The senior archivist entered with the old ledger pressed close to his chest. An archivist is the official responsible for protecting royal records, private collections, and access logs, and this one understood the danger of what he carried. He avoided Camilla's gaze as he placed the ledger before William. His hands moved carefully, but the fear showed. The book was not just a record. It was proof of who had asked, who had signed, and who had tried to reach Diana's memory through official channels. William turned the pages slowly, until one entry stopped him cold. A recent internal request had been filed to catalog selected vault items for heritage review. The words sounded harmless, almost dull, but the prince knew how palace language worked. Catalog meant inspect. Heritage review meant possible display. Selected items meant someone already knew what they wanted. His quiet resolve hardened because the request did not feel like preservation. It felt like access, dressed in ceremony. Charles saw the same line and set his glasses on the table without speaking. The king looked embarrassed, not because he had been caught, but because the palace machine had again turned private grief into managed procedure. He understood why it mattered. If Diana's vault could be opened through vague wording, then the Queen's decree could be weakened without anyone openly breaking it. If family trust could be bypassed by paperwork, then William's authority meant nothing. Camilla denied ordering anything improper. The Queen Consort said she had not asked anyone to move around the decree, and Charles looked toward her as if he wanted desperately to believe every word. But the earlier Balmoral request now stood in the room again, heavier than before. William did not accuse her. Catherine did not interrupt. Still, Camilla felt the suspicion settle around her because the language in the ledger sounded too close to the old argument she had once made. Catherine noticed it before anyone else. One page in the copied ledger did not sit right. The numbering jumped. The sequence broke. She leaned closer, then looked at William with a calm that carried its own alarm. A page had been removed. Someone had tried to hide the full trail. The missing page did what shouting could not. It made the fallout immediate, and it forced the family to accept that the decree had already been tested. By nightfall, Windsor was no longer calm. Phones were silenced. Staff were moved. A private archive corridor was locked under new authority. And Camilla, who had entered the day expecting negotiation, found herself facing a new reality. The late Queen's word had become a wall, and William was now standing in front of it, with no intention of stepping aside. William gave the order with a voice that did not rise. The vault access system was to be frozen until the missing ledger page was found and every previous request had been checked. An access system meant the official method used to approve entry, record names, and track movement around protected royal collections. This mattered because Diana's private vault was no longer only a room of memory. It had become a test of whether the Queen's final command could actually hold against pressure from inside the family. Camilla sat alone after the meeting, stunned in a way anger could not hide. The Queen Consort had expected another royal compromise, the kind where painful words were softened and everyone walked away with something. Instead, she had been told that no staff member, no archivist, and no palace official could move, photograph, catalog, or display anything linked to Diana without William's written approval. The door closed behind her, and the sound felt final. Her influence over that part of royal memory had ended in one day. Charles went to her privately, but comfort did not come easily. The king wanted to tell Camilla that the matter could still be handled, that the palace could still find a gentler path. Yet he knew the decree was both legally firm and emotionally impossible to dismiss. It carried the Queen's authority, and it carried Diana's pain. Charles sat near Camilla, choosing his words carefully, but she understood his hesitation. He could feel sorry for her, but he could not undo what his mother had written. Catherine found William in the corridor, and her calm cut through the noise around him. She told him softly that protecting Diana's memory could not become a public act of cruelty. The princess knew why the vault mattered. She knew why the missing page had changed everything. But she also knew that grief, once given power, could become dangerous. William listened, because Catherine was not asking him to step back. She was asking him to stay human while standing firm. Whispers moved quickly through the household. Aides began saying the Queen had seen this crisis coming, because the decree blocked every loophole before anyone could use one. William's name now carried the full weight of enforcement. Camilla's name carried the pain of exclusion. Charles carried both burdens and could not set either one down. The immediate consequence was brutal in its simplicity. Camilla no longer had influence over Diana-linked royal memory. Not quietly, not indirectly, not through staff. And as the machinery of restriction tightened around the vault, William faced the harder question Catherine had placed before him: how to protect his mother without letting pain rule him. The turning point did not happen in a council room. It happened in a smaller chamber, away from aides, away from protocol, away from the machinery that had made everyone harder than they wanted to be. William and Charles stood alone at last. For once, there was no crown between them. Only a son, a father, and the memory of a woman neither of them could escape. William entered first, carrying the silence of the day with him. Charles followed more slowly, and the king looked older than he had that morning. A council room was where official royal decisions were debated, but this was different. This was private, stripped of titles, stripped of witnesses, stripped of every careful phrase that had protected them for years. The prince did not come to accuse his father. He came because Catherine's words had followed him. Protect Diana, but do not let pain rule you. Charles spoke before William could begin. He admitted the decree hurt because it proved how unfinished the past still was inside the family. The king said the queen had not only protected a vault, she had exposed the part of the monarchy that still could not say Diana's name without tension entering the room. William listened, and for once, he did not interrupt. He understood that Charles was not defending Camilla in that moment. He was facing the cost of a life that had left too many hearts carrying different versions of the same wound. William answered with a calm that made the words heavier. He told Charles the decision was not about punishing Camilla. It was about honoring the queen's final boundary and protecting Diana's private dignity. The prince said his mother had given enough of herself to the public, enough to the palace, enough to history. Whatever remained behind that vault door had to stay untouched unless it served truth, not image. Charles looked down when William said Diana's name. Not with anger, not with bitterness, only grief. Charles became visibly emotional, and that changed the air between them. The king had expected resistance, perhaps blame, perhaps the old pain returning as fire. Instead, William gave him restraint. The prince said the missing ledger page would not be used as a weapon against Camilla unless clear misconduct was proven. He would not turn suspicion into punishment. He would not let grief become revenge. Charles heard the difference, and for the first time that day, he seemed to understand the man standing before him. William waited for his father's answer, and Charles finally gave it. The king accepted that the vault had to remain protected. He agreed not to challenge the decree, not to ask for softer language, and not to pressure him into turning the queen's final command into a palace compromise. That acceptance did not heal everything. It did not erase Camilla's pain or Diana's shadow, but it gave the crisis a new shape. The turning point was not victory, it was control. William would enforce the queen's command firmly, but without public humiliation. Charles would carry the sadness of that choice, but not fight it. And that restraint changed the shape of the crisis but outside palace walls. The world was already preparing to turn one sealed decree into a national reckoning. By morning, the secret had escaped the walls. Britain woke to a royal story that felt less like gossip and more like history striking the table. One headline carried the force of a verdict. One image carried the sorrow of a generation. And as crowds gathered beyond the palace gates, Diana's name returned to the center of the monarchy with a power no one could control. William saw the front page before the first palace response had been approved. The headline was brutal. The Queen's Final Wall, Camilla barred, from Diana's vault. Beside it sat a split image of the prince and the late princess, turning a private family decree into a national wound. A newspaper front page matters because it does not simply report a moment. It fixes it in public memory. William understood that instantly, and the weight of it troubled him. He had wanted protection, not spectacle. Camilla watched the coverage from a private room, and every word seemed to tighten around her name. The queen consort had been denied access in private. But now the country was reading it as rejection, judgment, and history all at once. A broadcaster described the decree as the most emotionally charged royal order of the modern reign. And that phrase began moving everywhere. A royal order means an official command backed by the authority of the crown. For Camilla, that made the humiliation deeper, because this was not being treated as family tension. It was being treated as monarchy law. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace before midday. Some carried white roses, placing them near the gates, as if Diana's memory had suddenly become present again. The gesture was quiet, but it spoke louder than any studio debate. People were not only reacting to Camilla being blocked, they were reacting to the idea that the Queen had drawn a final line around Diana's private life. That mattered because it gave the public a simple emotional truth. Even after all these years, some parts of Diana still needed defending. Catherine urged restraint when the palace team began drafting its statement. She told William that the response had to protect dignity, not feed division. The princess knew that one wrong sentence could turn Camilla into a target and William into a weapon. The prince listened, still bothered by the front page, still aware that his mother's name could stir love and anger in equal measure. Catherine's calm mattered, because she understood both sides of public emotion. Sympathy could become cruelty if the palace mishandled it. Charles approved the final message with a heavy heart. The king allowed the palace to confirm that Diana's private collection would remain protected under established royal authority. But he refused to let the statement attack Camilla. William accepted that choice. Camilla remained wounded by it. Catherine watched the language land exactly where it had to land, firm, quiet, final. And when the public noise finally settled, the monarchy was left with the only question that mattered: not who had won, but what the decree had revealed. In the end, the decree did not destroy the monarchy. It exposed it. It showed where grief still lived, where loyalty still mattered, and where the past could no longer be rearranged for comfort. William had opened a sealed command, but what he truly unsealed was a truth the family had avoided for years. Diana's memory was not a room to be entered. It was a boundary to be respected. William completed the final enforcement with a steadiness that felt heavier than victory. The formal order was placed before him, and the prince signed it without celebration. An enforcement order means the written step that turns a royal command into active palace practice, making sure staff, officials, and family members must follow it. This mattered because the Queen's decree could no longer be treated as a painful private wish. It had become the rule that protected Diana's vault from pressure, confusion, and quiet negotiation. Charles watched the signature land and accepted what it meant. The king felt visible sadness, because honoring his mother's command also meant admitting the limit of his own power. He could not soften the decree for Camilla. He could not rewrite the Queen's final boundary for comfort. Charles understood that the monarchy had reached a point where duty demanded pain. He had spent years trying to hold the past together, but this time, the past had spoken back through his mother's hand. Camilla was not publicly attacked, and William made sure of that. The Queen Consort's access was definitively denied, but the prince refused to turn the decision into humiliation. Her role in Diana-linked royal memory was permanently limited, yet her name was not dragged through a public trial. That restraint mattered, because it proved William was not acting as a wounded son seeking revenge. He was acting as a future king, learning that power becomes dangerous when it is fed by anger. Catherine stood beside him as the final papers were placed away. The princess did not look triumphant, and she did not need to speak. Her quiet support carried the meaning of the day. Diana's dignity had been protected, but no one in that room had truly won. The missing ledger page had been recovered and sealed into the review file, ending the immediate panic without turning the crisis into another palace war. The danger had been contained. The lesson had not. William closed the file at last, and the silence that followed felt different from the silence that began it. The Queen's final decree had protected Diana's private dignity, forced the prince into mature authority, and made Charles face the cost of unresolved history. Camilla left with a boundary she could not cross. Catherine remained beside a man who had chosen restraint over rage. The monarchy emerged bruised but steadier, because this time it chose memory over image, duty over comfort, and silence over spectacle. There was no further mystery left to chase, only William closing the file, not as a wounded son seeking revenge, but as a future king choosing protection, restraint, and duty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.